Hello. Hi. My clicker works. It's lovely to be here at Sausage Dog Global Conference 24. I was expecting more. I may have misunderstood the hashtag. It's a little bit blurred, and it's been itching my brain all day yesterday. It's a room full of designers. They're going, that's a bit blurred on the side there. So here we are. I want to go back, and it would be nice if I could get my speaker notes, by the way. I don't know if that's a little reference to Adele. I'm not going to stand there. When we were young, here is Ben Reason, Lavrance Lovely, and myself. Terribly, incredibly unfashionable, actually. I don't know what was going on there. 11 years ago, and we had just finished sort of breaking the back of the structure of the book. And as you might know from actually doing service design, it's a kind of sort of fractal, interrelated thing. A lot of stuff happens in parallel, and it's not very linear, and books are linear. And it was a real struggle to do that. And it's actually been 10 years since it was published. And if you've read it, thank you. And we sat down, we sort of had a chat. I said we sat down, we were all on Zoom, and had a chat about 10 years later, what's changed, what's gone on, what impact has service design had, what hasn't happened. When we wrote it, we had lots of optimism about the impact that service design would have, how we were going to run the world, and everything was going to be much better for it. All the services that were terribly broken were going to be not broken anymore. So there's still a bit of work in progress on that front. And we wrote a lot about methods, and there was quite a lot about how to do service design. I still teach service design in Lucerne, and I wanted a book to teach from. And that was kind of part of the reason for writing it in the first place. And in that time, there's been the rise of product. For better and worse, I know I rail on product quite often, but there's been good things. There's also problematic stuff. There's been the whole sort of wave of design thinking too. And I think despite all the self-flagellation, sort of beating ourselves up in the last kind of year and a half, of like, oh my God, design's in crisis, what have we done? Nobody understood us, and we didn't manage to prove our impact and our return on investment. I actually think the design project and the service design project has been more or less a success. There are lots and lots of service designers in all sorts of areas of life. There are service designers in the city of Helsinki. Is anyone from Helsinki Airport here? I know there are service designers there, and it's a very lovely airport to go through. There are service designers we heard all day yesterday in all sorts of spheres of life. And I kid you not, it's hard to sort of think back maybe 15 or 20 years ago. If you will walk into, say, an insurance company or a government organization and talk about doing research and speaking to customers or mapping out their end-to-end journeys, they would just look at you like I was an alien. And really, the fact that you are all here is testament to the success. Birgit was saying last night, it started with just this small handful of people, and now look at you all. Give yourselves a round of applause. Well done. That said, there's a couple of things I've noticed, and one of them is this thing I've come to call organizational amnesia. I had an experience, I can't name names because Accenture's kind of, security will burst through the door and wrestle me to the ground. A large, well-known company in Australia when I was working at Fjord. And we had the client, and the client came in one day and they said, so here's some stuff that, we found some stuff in like a digital drawer somewhere that some people did about 5 years ago. And this was all about, they were going through a CX transformation thingy, the kind of thing. And my colleague and I sat there, and my colleague Gabe said, I've got the original artwork of that stuff because I made those storyboards of sort of, user journeys. And I said, now I've got the photograph of the Post-it notes on the wall that Gabe used to make that diagram. And this was like 5 years later. What happened? And what happened was, well, there was a restructure, and that person left the company, and these other people moved somewhere else, and that department got merged with this one. And what happens when that happens is that when sort of practices aren't practiced, it's a bit like languages that aren't spoken. They die out, and so the organization is like a little sort of neural pathway starts to fade, and you get this amnesia. You know, and sometimes you get McKinsey or someone comes in to do resource optimization, firing lots of people, and it's like they've given that company, that organization, a lobotomy. You know, suddenly there's a whole bit of their brain that's just not there anymore, and they kind of go along for a while. And one of the things that happens in that is a lot of processes get set up, and there's a few people were talking about it yesterday about processes. But processes, when they become disconnected from the original intent, they kind of become these zombie things, right? They become these zombie processes where we just do this stuff, and we don't really think that much about the original intent behind there, or we don't really kind of look at the history of those things. And then what you end up with is this is just the way we do things around here. Now, of course, a lot of our job is to go into organizations and say, well, you know, why do you do things like that? And how about if you do it like this new service design way? But if we're not careful, we become guilty of that ourselves. And, you know, in the worst cases, you know, Marie and Angelica yesterday talked about this. You end up kind of putting in our own structural biases in there. Angelica yesterday was talking about in the designing for gender in service design. And, you know, you end up in that thing, yeah, we're going to do the research and we do this. And hang on a minute, I've actually just been doing research and designing for men. And I've forgotten more than half of the population. And so when we kind of blindly just follow those processes without kind of thinking about what is it we want to achieve by these things, we end up with these zombie things. And I think, you know, there's a critique of perhaps the sort of wave of design thinking is that it's been kind of this method, we'll take this method and we do a workshop and it's like you've got a kind of bag of methods and you just pull stuff out and go, oh, that looks quite fun, I'll have one of those, without really thinking about the intent behind what do we want to try and do and what's the input-output sequence of those things, where do these methods come from, what biases are built into them and all those things. And that stuff is really, really important. And if you're going to kind of think about impact, if you're going to think about sort of your role leading teams, it's very, very important to know some of your history and go back into that stuff. That kind of process optimization, that very industrial mindset, you know, it comes from the assembly line. It comes from this industrial way of thinking. And, you know, the idea of sort of optimizing a machine, and basically what a factory is people who work inside a machine, really, on other machines. That works for things that are discrete objects like, these are razors actually, that are not going to change. And if you make one, they're all the same. The thing doesn't kind of evolve and change as it goes through the assembly line, it doesn't become something else. And that kind of industrial mindset is very, very, very prevalent in organizations still. And this is the thing, you know, we've been saying the same. I've been saying the same thing for 15 years, so sorry about this. But really, you know, this idea of that kind of, that a company is a machine and the machine's there to be optimized. And this is my critique to product, is that the language of product is often around, you know, we talk around shipping stuff. You know, particularly in digital. No one ships stuff in digital. I do remember shipping digital stuff. You remember burning a CD and it getting pressed, going off to a pressing plant. People just deploy their code, but you know, you're just uploading it to someone else's computer somewhere in the world. And what you're really doing in those things is you're actually working in an ecosystem. Of course, services really are ecosystems. And so my more favored metaphor for this are gardens. And I really like landscape gardens because they're these kind of big things, and there's this really nice balance between ego and humility. A landscape garden, and this is Stoke Park in Buckinghamshire in the UK. It was built in the late 18th century. It cost £130,000 back then to build that, And it was Capability Brown and Humphrey Repton. They were two very, very famous landscape architects. And there's something about this that I really find fascinating, because on the one hand, you have to have the kind of the ego, the ambition to say, I'm going to landscape this whole kind of area of land here, and I'm going to make it look like it's natural. And on the other hand, I'm going to build something that I'm never going to see the end of in my lifespan. And so there's this sort of ego and humility that I think is really fundamental in both design. You have to have the ego to say, why is that done this way? I think it could be done that way. And here's the thing, I'm going to put a thing in the world. And at the same time, the humility to understand that I'm putting something into the world, and that's an ecosystem, and it has a ripple effect, it has impact. The nice thing about gardens also, is that you have to think about what you're doing. You can't just have everyone going off and doing their own thing. Right? You can't have the VP of growth going, do you know what, the investors want their money back really quickly, 10x. So we're going to plant bamboo everywhere, and it's going to be really great. Just see, and if anyone's had bamboo in their garden, I can tell you it is a terrible pest, and it gets really out of control. But instead, what happens is sometimes you plant things with all good intentions, and then you plant something else. You might plant a tree there, and that tree does really well. It really flourishes. Wonderful. But now it's casting shade over these other things, and they're starting to die. And what you have to then do is make a decision. You have to say, well, do we cut back the tree? Do we let those things die? Do we replant them somewhere else? And none of those things are necessarily the right or the wrong decision. The point is you have to have a conversation about it. You can't just have everyone kind of running off and doing their own thing. And finally, nobody says we shipped the garden. Right? They're never finished. They're an ongoing thing, and like most of the services that you will work on, at least most of the important things, finance, welfare, healthcare, all of those things like that, they've been around since before any of us were born, and they'll be around after you die. So our job is really to be custodians much more than it is to be sort of the makers of a thing that we shove out into the world thoughtlessly. And I want to talk about impact on a smaller level, because a lot of people have been talking about impact on the bigger level, and all of that is important. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that I don't care about the planet or any of the other things going on in the world. But actually, one of the things that you can have the biggest impact of is the people you immediately work with, and the ripple effect of that. If Birgit had gone, well, I really like service design, but that's just me. I'm going to just go off in the corner and do that on my own. None of this would be here. Right? And none of the people you work with would have this experience, and none of the organizations you work with would shift at all. But it really, really starts at that individual level. And your behavior and the way you interact with people on an individual level is really the key to a lot more impact than you think. Because part of the problem is when you operate at that big, high level of Zoom, it's very overwhelming, and it's very hard to know where to start. But we do know how to interact with people. And the thing about companies, they're not really real, right? They're an idea. This is Toys R Us. It was founded in 1957. At one point, it controlled a quarter of the world's toy sales. Amazing, right? In 2007, it filed for bankruptcy with $5 billion of debt. One day, someone will be standing on a stage like this and saying, do you remember Tesla? Do you remember that company that was owned by the world's richest infant? What happened? It was going to solve the energy crisis, and then they got involved in this whole AI stuff and just made it worse. I think we know what will have happened. I don't think that's a difficult pre-mortem to do. So really the thing is that companies are actually, I got asked this question once. Someone asked me, what are companies for? And it was a really good question. I thought about it. And really companies are a group of people briefly coming together to satisfy some needs. And sometimes those are the needs of shareholders to make more money. Sometimes they're there to satisfy an unmet need in the market or in the citizenship, for people in the world. Sometimes it's simply because I can't do this thing on my own. I need some other skills, and so a group of people coming together is the way that I'm going to do this. And you know, when you think of it this way, and I know it's a huge cliche. This is the most cliche slide you could probably have of a flock of birds. But I really like this idea that to remember that these things are kind of fairly temporary. Because there's a lot of stress that kind of builds up. And there's a lot of stress when we lean really heavily on our process and we think this is the way we need to do things. And we end up with this. Just give me a show of hands if anyone has had this experience in their life as a service designer. Okay, you liars. The rest of you don't have your hands up and lying. I heard this a lot, and I hear it a lot from my coaches. I heard it a lot at Fjord. And, I was thinking, wow, we got this process, and they just won't let us do it. How annoying they are. But actually, projects are 95% of conversations, probably 99%, I think. That when I was there in particular at Fjord, and I was a design director there, I didn't have really teams coming to me saying, hey, Andy, we're really stuck with the designing of this. Can you help? They knew what they were doing. It was always, this person's being difficult, we're having this trouble in the team. It was all people stuff. It was really all people stuff. And what I hear from my coachees all the time these days, who are now leading design teams and departments, is the same stuff. It's all like, this person, this stakeholder is being really difficult. I've got this member of my team and they're just playing up. And what I come to realize is to make that complaint is a bit like being a firefighter and saying, this job, I get burnt, I smell of smoke. Why do people keep starting fires? This is so really annoying. The meta work is the work. I mean, it's a very large part of the work. And I like to think, I've talked about Angelica 3 times now. I'm going to assume these firefighters are women here, too. If you didn't see her talk, go and watch it online, then it'll all make sense. And so instead of feeling like, to be kind of active in leadership in the organization as a designer, I need to kind of take off my trainers and put on a suit. Well, take off my T-shirt, put on a suit. You can lean into one of the skills that you probably have as a service design person, which is that leadership really is kind of like slow motion facilitation. And I facilitate a lot. I really like facilitating. And when I kind of realized this, it was a massive unlock for me, because I was like, I kind of know how to do this. Because if you think of when you facilitate, you're doing a lot of reading the room. You're doing a lot, you do it online too, but especially in an actual space with real people. You think a lot about who's invited and who's not invited, who's included and not included. You think about power structures. A lot of the methods we might use in a workshop are to flatten out power structures and hierarchy. We think about spaces and food and tools and things like that, the actual sort of really human part. If you've got a whole load of people who are very hungry in an all-day workshop, they get hangry really quite quickly. I'm really wondering what the signing is for hangry, actually. And we think about the structure, we think about cadence, we think about sort of input-output sequence of different activities and how they feed into each other. We do things where we have everyone coming together, and then we do things that, if you do it well, you do things where people can go off, so particularly for the introverts, so you can go off and do some stuff on your own, and then you come back together. We think of all of these things, and there's quite a lot of, in the room reading, you'll see that sometimes the classic thing that happens when you have a table of 5 or 7 people, it's often odd numbers, and it splits apart. Or you have sort of 4 people working away and someone's checked out on their phone and not really into it. Or you say, okay, everyone, we're going to do this activity. Here it all is, here's the template, go. And everyone goes, I don't know what we're supposed to be doing here. Do you know what we're supposed to? And something's wrong, right? It's not with them, but it's like, I've done something, I haven't explained the purpose correctly. And so when you then think about this on a slow motion kind of level, it can be a team working on a project over a week or a month or over a year. It can be a whole group of people. You see the same patterns turn up. Someone is not really happy to be there. Someone is kind of checked out. People don't really know what they're supposed to be doing or why. and we got things out of sequence, and all of that stuff. Right? Don't have the right tools. Don't have real sticky notes. We've just got the cheap ones that fall off when the aircon's on. And so I like to kind of boil things down to simple questions. And there's a question, it's not so simple actually, it's a bit of a word salad, but there's a question to unpack. So instead of thinking about frameworks and processes and all of that stuff, which kind of feel sometimes a bit constraining and don't really, excuse me, don't really take into account the context. I like instead to think of this question, which is, are the right people able to have the right conversations and work together in the right way at the right time? Word salad, sorry. And you can say, hang on. You can, oh, hang on, I'm losing my mic. And you can say, enabled rather than able. But when you think about, well, who are the right people? So, well, that's a good question. Who are the right people? Do we need policy people in here? Do we need product people in here? What's the right conversation to be having in the kind of right way? Is this something that should be a kind of Slack message? Or is this something actually where we need to sit on a call? Is this something where we need to get together in a room? Is this a workshop? Is this a meeting? Is this something where we're prioritizing things? Is this something where we're agreeing on things? And if you think about how you would construct a workshop, when you think about, well, what's the intent? What are the outcomes we want? What are the outputs we want? Two different things. Then you kind of start having a much more intentional conversation. It kind of doesn't really matter. You're not a slave to some kind of framework, but actually you start to think about this stuff. And you start to build up actually a kind of governance around how you work together. And how you work together is really important. The biggest lie, I think, in work is this idea that it's not personal, it's just business. It's all personal. Right? We all, I guarantee someone's got a hangover in here, right, and is struggling to concentrate right now. All of the stuff we experience in our lives, and all the stuff that we grew up with, our parents. I talk about parents quite a lot in coaching because they're the first people who are in charge around here, right? They're your first role models of leadership. And all of that stuff, you bring it to work with you. You can pretend that you don't, but it's a lie. And actually, it's worse if you pretend you don't, because it leads to people burning out. And one of the things I realized about kind of dealing with the difficult stakeholder was I've been a difficult stakeholder. I've been the annoying person. I have been the one who's burned bridges. And all of us will be. You as service designers go in and you say to people, hey, you know the way you're working? Do it this way. This is really great. And then the product people come in and go, you know the way you're working? And we all do it. But of course, when we're doing it ourselves, we don't think about it. And I had this experience. I don't know if anyone's done skydiving here. I've talked about this before, so some of you might have heard this story. But this is me, some time ago, tandem skydiving over Wollongong in Australia. Wollongong in the house. And, there's a lot of sort of, well, it's not really theatre. I was going to say safety theatre. I hope it's actual safety. At the beginning, you're on the ground, and they go, "I'll do a dry run through this and show you, and what's going to happen is I'm going to tap you on the shoulder, and you do that, and okay." And that's quite useful, actually, because you know a little bit of what's coming. And then you go up and go into this very tiny plane, and you go up to 30,000 feet or so, and then someone opens the door. And my first thing was like, what? Close the door? What are you doing? It's like someone opening a door in a car on the motorway, because... And I was like, oh, yeah, no, we have to jump out. And you're wearing a harness, and you're carabined, you're clipped to the other guy, right? And so there's this very awkward kind of thing where he sort of shuffles to the edge of the plane with you sort of on his lap. And here, look at my relaxed face here. I look like I'm about to throw up. But look at his face. It's like, this is great. I'm about to jump out of a plane. And I'm like, I'm about to jump out of a plane. And And then, in the next bit, there's a video of this, but I spared you the video. Look at his face. He's looked like he's doing, for the yogis in here, it's like he's doing Shavasana. He's just kind of like, oh, man. I am about to sort of pop a vein in my head there. Because when you first go out, you're upside down. Look where the earth is there on this picture. And my brain was just going, emergency, emergency. I really had that moment of like, I've just done a thing that I should never do in my life. Right? I'm falling to the earth. And if I grab onto his arms in panic because I'm worried we're going to plummet to our deaths, well, then we plummet to our deaths, right? Because he can't pull the chute. I'm still looking quite concerned here. He's all like, hang out. And I realized I'm that guy with the tongue out, right? And my stakeholders are the ones who are me. This is his office, right? He does this every day, God knows how many times a day, 5 days a week. For him, so I'm going to go take a tourist up and kind of jump out of a plane, scare the bejesus out of him. And I realized, the mismatch between our understanding and of the process and our understanding that, we're going to go through something that we've gone through before, and there's going to be this messy middle here, and you're going to be scared and not know what's going on. We don't really name that very often. But if you do, it's really, really helpful. Because when someone is freaking out and say, I said you were going to have that time when you're freaking out and you're going to think we don't know what's going on. This is that time. And at some point, he sort of shouted in he can't keep his tongue in. Look at him. That's dangerously close to licking my head. Don't you think? At some point, he sort of shouted in my ear and went, "It's amazing, isn't it?" And I was like, "Oh, yeah, it is. Yeah, this is amazing." Okay. And so, what you can really do is, it sounds kind of really pessimistic, but it's very useful when someone's being really difficult to think, what are they afraid and anxious about? Because it brings it down to a human level. It's very empathetic, really. And then you can think, well, okay, if this person's afraid and anxious, I don't really want them to be afraid and anxious. What can I do to help mitigate their fear and anxiety? And sometimes it's going to be whatever the design equivalent is of kind of tugging on the carabiners to check everything's okay. Sometimes it's going to be working out loud more. Sometimes it's going to be explaining things that are self-evident truths to you that don't make any sense to that person at all. And sometimes it's about working out what they care about. So there's a magic question when you're trying to kind of think about design and sort of make the case for it, and make the case for the impact, and make the case for why you should invest in it at all. And it's this. It's like, so what? Who cares? It gets you past the self-evident truths to yourself. So, you will have something like, well, we need to hire more service designers. Of course we do, because service design is great, so we should have more of them. And you go in this sort of circular argument. But ask yourself, well, so what? Who cares? And you'll ladder up to something like, well, because then we'll have more coordination between the different silos who are, working independently. Okay, so what? Who cares? Why does that matter? Well, it matters because then we're going to make fewer mistakes, and we're going to, in the end, it'll be things like, we'll reduce the number of mistakes we make or errors, and fewer people will be calling support, or, we won't have to redo stuff. You'll find it ladders up to three things. Anna talked about this yesterday. It's going to ladder up to making more money, saving money, or mitigating risk and reducing risk. And reducing risk is really saving money in disguise, right? But those are things that quite a lot of people care about, because the shocking truth is the CEO doesn't really care about design. They don't ask accountants, so show me your spreadsheet process. Tell me, show me all the great things you can do on spreadsheets. They just go, can you achieve the stuff we need to do? Can you do our tax return? And that's kind of the humility part, I think, that we need to face as designers. So I want to go back down to the sort of personal level to finish with. I'm going to try and go. I know we're running late. It wasn't my fault. So I'm going to talk, so I have the the joy, really, of doing one-to-one coaching with a lot of people, and I'm very fortunate, a lot more diverse than I am. And so, and in every kind of discipline, and lots of designers, but service design and other people too. Startups, scale-ups, big enterprises, public organizations. And it's been really fascinating to me over the years to see these different patterns that start to emerge, and how they then have solving those things as an unlock for those people. And it's not me solving them, I'm helping those people solve it themselves. But also that then goes on to have this ripple effect. Because if someone is having a bad day on an individual level, okay. If you're leading a team of people, of 30, 40 people, and you're having a bad day, 30 or 40 people also have a bad day. Right? And then the exponential thing of that gets very big, that suddenly everyone's in a really toxic culture. So the first thing I want to talk about, because it comes up quite often, is this. Servant leadership, this idea that I'm in sort of service of the people I'm leading, is great. But it can very quickly move into martyrdom. So if you're leading a group of people, a team of people, sometimes you're the sort of meat in the sandwich. You're getting kind of, if your view is I should take the blows from my team from above, you will also get blows from the team from below. You will just burn out. And it is really, really important to fill your cup first. If you cannot lead yourself, if you cannot find some kind of stability and energy, and if you're just constantly depleted, you'll burn out, and then what will happen is you'll go, and everything else might fall apart, and you're not doing anyone else any favor. I prefer the word enabler than leader, because I think enabler feels much more like I'm trying to help people do what they do well. But it also has this negative connotation, right? We talk about an enabler when we talk about someone who's enabling an addict, or alcoholic, or enabling toxic behavior, enabling misogyny or racism because didn't say anything. And it goes both ways. And so really checking your behavior and thinking yourself about what am I enabling at the moment is a really important thing. And one of the things you can help everyone with is defending your time and boundaries. My wife hates this picture because it's a Nerf gun. It's a toy gun. Okay, it's a Nerf gun. I picked it up in the office one day. Because we're designers and we have toys. But this thing of defending your time and boundaries, this is really, really important. We take on more and more stuff as you rise up, but we don't give up much stuff, and it's really important to give up stuff. And there's a kind of systems effect for people who are into systems thinking. There's a kind of systems effect in organizations where it's not like a kind of big evil empire that is trying to just eat you, but lots and lots of small things. They're like lava kind of going down a mountainside. If you do not put a rock in the way and say, yeah, sorry, I can't do that. I can't do this in time. I don't have time. You will have a calendar that looks like Tetris, and when I look at coaches' calendars and say, when do you do your real work? Because I see about 6 hours in the week, and it's all in sort of 20-minute blocks of spare time. The answer is evenings and weekends. And if you don't say, I can't do it, there's no feedback loop that happens, and whoever's asked you to do a thing in leadership or whatever, they don't get the message that their ambitions are greater than their willingness to resource them. And in fact, what happens is you spend your weekends and evenings away from your loved ones and the things you love doing, working for free. So, defend them. Just say no. Make every meeting a workshop. I talked about this already with this of intent. We think about workshops in a very different way than we think about meetings, especially ones that are just there every week as repeating meetings. And if you think of it this way, like what's our intent? What are we trying to achieve here? What are the outcomes? What are the outputs we want? And if you can't actually answer that, or if the person who's booked the meeting in your calendar can't answer that, don't have it. If you're having a repeating meeting and people just turning up and filling it because they feel like they should, try getting rid of it and see what happens. You can always put it back in. Don't panic. But I kid you not, you can probably get rid of half of the meetings in your calendar and nothing bad will happen. Preach design less. That's the origin of the kind of so what question, really, is that you have this, in a kind of design leadership position, you have this problem where you kind of have to speak two languages, because you're going to talk, you spent your whole career talking about design to designers, and then you have to kind of shift and talk about other stuff, talk about the outcomes you're trying to achieve, talk about the impact you want to get, achieve, and design just happens to be the way you're doing it. And the origin really of that, why don't they just let me do service design properly, is this, because you're kind of preaching something to someone who just doesn't care, and it's not their problem that they don't care. It's not their job to care. It's your job to care about that and to care about how it gets done, but it's not your job to convince them. You know, here we are in the Church of Service Design. Welcome. But you know, it's not it's not your job to kind of convert them. Right. My wife's a psychotherapist. Hi, if you're watching. And so a lot of the work done in therapy, you know, in couple therapy, is really about this sort of meta communication as well, which is communicating about how you communicate. And there's a lot of like, you know, did you hear what he said? You know, and did you actually hear what he said? And there's a lot of that going on, and this is really important. Again, when you go through this process, you go through a therapeutic process, one of the things you're doing, particularly in relationships, is being really more intentional about how you communicate with each other and how you relate with each other. And again, we sort of don't do that at work. We assume, well, this person is the you know, my boss, and then the next one on the org chart, and so they get to tell me what to do. But actually, you know, getting to this part is really important. And sometimes I have coachees, and they're really, really frustrated. And, oh, it's just this person, I hate them. And I'm like, what do you really want to say to them? And then they gave me the really sweary version of that. And then I say, okay, well, why don't you just say that, just without the swearing? And they do, and they find a way to say it. And they have this thing that they've been terribly scared of having a conversation about for weeks. When they have the conversation, and then resolve it. And it's because they're having the kind of meta-communication thing of talking about how they're feeling, not in the moment of having those feelings. And it's really important. I'm nearly done. It's really important to find the shape of you and work out what you're about. Right? And particularly, the further up you go, the more important that is. And we don't actually do it very often. We sort of do it once, maybe when we graduate, and maybe when we shift careers, but we don't often sit down and go, you know, what am I all about? What's my point of view of things, and what's my offer to the world and my value proposition? And that's really important, because the more you're clear about that, the more you have something you can hold on to, it enables you to say yes to some things and say no to other things. That's how you learn to say no. Right? And being in a leadership position it's a bit of a gig, right? There's some times when you're on stage. This is Beyonce here, from her Sasha Fierce tour. If people know I am Sasha Fierce. Sasha Fierce is Beyonce's kind of alter ego. Apparently she's quite shy in real life and quite quiet, but she needed to kind of find this other part of her, and it's not like a different person, but this other part of her where when she is on stage, she said, you know, it brings out the kind of more, the sexy, aggressive, kind of more exciting side of me. And then she can kind of put it away again, which is really important. There is going to be a time when people are expecting you to stand here and show leadership capabilities, to speak up, to do things, to have awkward conversations, and you have to kind of find the way to do that and find what gives you confidence. And part of that comes from doing your inner work, right? This is a fisherman I walked past in Italy, and there he was, you know, in the morning. He'd been fishing that morning, and probably all night, and he was going through his nets, and he was taking out all the kind of bits of twigs and stuff, and he was fixing any small holes in it that had broken. And if he doesn't do this sort of every day or every time or regularly, eventually the net breaks and he loses his entire catch. And so it's often just small things about taking time for yourself, about making sure that you're not working weekends and evenings all the time, every time, about checking in with people, asking whether people are okay. All of those things, those small things make a big difference. Because when the net breaks, that's when burnout happens. And then the final thing I'd like to leave you with is just be comfortable improvising. Right? There's a phrase that someone once said to me years ago, and I've never traced it, which is, the disappointing thing about growing up is realizing adults don't have all the answers. You know, and the thing you start to realize is all those people who you think like know what they're doing, they're just making it up, right? And so can you. But you know, if you've got several years of experience, you're not just making it up out of nowhere. You've got several years of experience and pattern recognition and all of those things, just in the way jazz musicians learn their scales, they learn their chord progressions, so in the moment they can improvise. And really, you know, everyone is making life up as they go along. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Just checking.
Do we need to skip the questions, or are we?
I'm just checking if there's any questions.
I'm not on Instagram, so if the question is, where's your dog? He's on Instagram, though, so there you go.
Your dog
You can impress my daughter by like having 700 new followers on Instagram.
Yeah, it's just dog-related questions,
Okay,
actually.
all right, okay.
Yeah,
Well, we'll
yeah.
leave that.
Why is your dog so cute? Can I pat your dog? Does your dog have an Instagram account?
Yeah.
Is your dog the best of doggers? Yeah, that's it. That's all
Okay.
the other questions.
All right.
Big round of applause for Andy Polaine.
Thank you very much. Thanks.